All right, strap in, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into a case that's, well, it's going to make you think twice about who you trust. We're talking about John Ruthell Henry.
Ah, John Ruthell Henry.
Mm.
This is a case that really sticks with you, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Executed in Florida back in 2014. But it's not just the crimes themselves, it's the whole twisted story. Like, get this, the same detective arrested him for killing both of his wives.
Years apart, no less. Talk about a strange coincidence.
It's wild, right? And we've got a mountain of stuff to dig through. News articles, court docs, even some psych reports you sent over. Should be interesting to see what we uncover.
Definitely. Well, let's lay the groundwork first. Henry, he was born in Florida in 1951. Pretty normal childhood by all accounts. But then 1975 rolls around, and things take a very dark turn.
Yeah, 75, that's when he kills his common-law wife, Patricia Roddy. They're driving, they get into an argument, he stops the car and just stabs her, over and over.
It's brutal. The medical examiners report it's chilling, almost 30 stab wounds, mostly her neck and upper body. Henry took off after, but he was caught. A deputy named, you're going to want to remember this, Fay Wilbur.
Wilbur, okay, got it. So what happened then? Murder. Gonna be a long sentence, right?
Well, he takes a plea deal. No contest to second-degree murder, gets 15 years.
15 years. That doesn't seem like much for, taking a life.
It does seem light, especially knowing what we know now. But get this, he only served 7.5, out on parole.
Hold on. Less than half his sentence, and he's back on the streets with his history. Seems like a recipe for disaster.
It's a tough question. Did the parole board miscalculate? Could they have foreseen what was to come? I mean, hindsight's 20/20, but
It's unsettling to think about. All right, so he's out, 1983. What's next for John Ruthell Henry?
he meets Suzanne Overstreet, a convenience store clerk. They get married pretty quick. She's got a 4-year-old son, Eugene. They call him Buggy.
Okay, new wife, instant family. Maybe this is a turning point for him, a chance to go straight.
Unfortunately, not quite. This marriage, it's a mess from the start. Drugs, legal trouble. Henry, he gets popped for firearms offenses multiple times, even while he's with Suzanne.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly a law-abiding citizen.
Big red flags there. Not exactly a stable home for a kid either. Poor Eugene.
No, not at all. Things get so bad that by 1984, Suzanne, she's scared, runs to a women's shelter, tries to get a restraining order against Henry.
Wow, she must have been terrified to take such drastic steps.
She was clearly in fear for her life and for Eugene's. And it's right around then, December 85, things take that even darker turn we were talking about.
This is where it gets really bad, isn't it?
It is. Henry goes to Suzanne's apartment, says he's going to buy Christmas presents for Eugene. Seems almost calculated, using the holidays like that.
Ah, it's sickening. Using a time for family and celebration like a cover for something so horrific.
Right. So they get into it. Henry and Suzanne, another argument. And, well, history repeats itself. He stabs her 13 times this time.
He just snaps again. It's chilling. Make you wonder if there's any hope for rehabilitation in a case like this.
It's a big question. Did this system address the root cause? Or did it just let him out to repeat the cycle of violence?
Chilling thought. There was that one detail in the report really stuck with me. After he stabs Suzanne, he just lights up a cigarette. Sits there, watches her die.
Cold. Shows a real lack of, well, any kind of human empathy, doesn't it? But that's not all. It gets worse. Henry wraps Suzanne's body in a rug, steals a car, and drives Eugene, little Buggy, to a pasture.
He takes the little boy. Oh, God, after killing his mother. That poor child must have been so scared.
It's unimaginable.
Yeah.
And in that pasture, he stabs Eugene to death.
Just horrific. So how was he caught this time? Did he run again?
Suzanne's sisters, they found her body, went to check on her when she didn't show for work. Neighbors had seen Henry leaving with Eugene, so he's suspect number 1.
Seems pretty open and shut at that point.
It was, and here's where that coincidence comes in. They find Henry at a motel with another woman. And guess who recognizes him?
It's gotta be Deputy Wilbur, right? Like, the same one from years back. What are the chances?
It's almost unbelievable, isn't it? Same detective, same guy, 2 dead wives. Wilbur slapped the cuffs on him right there. Henry confessed to everything, both killings. Even took them to the pasture where he'd killed Eugene.
Wow, a full confession. So with the murders in different counties, that means 2 separate trials, right?
2 trials, exactly.
Yeah.
One for Eugene's murder in Hillsborough County and one for Suzanne's in Pasco.
All right, so the legal battle begins. What was the defense's strategy? Did they even try to deny his involvement after a confession like that?
That's where things get interesting. They didn't deny it outright, but they did try to suppress the confession. Argued it wasn't voluntary, called Wilbur to the stand, tried to poke holes in his story, but Wilbur insisted Henry confess willingly, just refused to have it written down or recorded.
That's strange. Why wouldn't he want it documented? Seems like it would help his case.
It's a head-scratcher for sure. Makes you wonder what was going on in his mind. So we're picking back up with Henry facing 2 trials and a confession that's causing a lot of legal wrangling.
Yeah.
Let's unpack those trials a bit and see how things played out.
All right, 2 trials running side by side, one for Eugene, one for Suzanne. What were the main arguments from both sides?
Well, the big thing the defense pushed for was, no surprise, trying to get Henry off the death penalty. They brought up his past, the drug use, the drinking, trying to paint a picture of a guy with serious addiction problems who couldn't think straight.
So they're basically saying, look, he was messed up, didn't know what he was doing.
Right. And they also played the mental health card. Henry had been diagnosed with low-grade schizophrenia, so they used that to argue he wasn't in control, couldn't tell right from wrong.
Diminished capacity, trying to get the jury to sympathize with him, maybe see him as less responsible for his actions.
Exactly. But the prosecution, they weren't having it. They had their own expert, psychiatrist, who'd evaluated Henry.
And what did those experts have to say? Did they back up the defense's claims?
Well, they agreed that Henry did have schizophrenia. But here's the kicker. They said it didn't really impair his judgment. He knew what he was doing, knew it was wrong.
Ah, so they neutralized that whole didn't know right from wrong argument.
Pretty much. That expert testimony, it probably had a big impact on the jury. They see these professionals, these doctors saying, nope, he knew what he was doing.
Expert opinions carry a lot of weight for sure. So what was the final verdict?
Guilty on all counts, both trials. Henry got the death penalty twice over. Seemed like that was it. Justice was served. But hold on, 4 years later, the Florida Supreme Court steps in and they overturned the death sentence for Suzanne's murder.
Whoa, Supreme Court reversal. That's a pretty big deal. What was their reasoning?
Yeah. They said all the stuff presented about Eugene's murder, especially those graphic photos from the autopsy, it prejudiced the jury against Henry in Suzanne's case. Basically, seeing all those horrific details about the kid's death made them more likely to convict him for Suzanne's murder too, even if the evidence wasn't as strong.
So they're saying it wasn't a fair trial for Suzanne's case because of how the Eugene stuff was presented? Interesting legal point.
Yeah, it shows how tricky it can be to present a whole picture of a crime without, unfairly swaying the jury. Anyway, because of this, Henry got new trials for both murders.
Back to square one then, huh? What happened the second time around?
Well, in Suzanne's retrial, they brought Wilbur back to the stand. He doubled down on his earlier testimony, really emphasized how the crime scene at Suzanne's apartment showed a clear, deliberate attack. Nothing else was touched, no signs of a struggle.
Trying to show premeditation then, not a heat-of-the-moment thing. He went there to kill her.
Exactly. And even with the defense pushing that mental health and addiction angle again, the jury didn't buy it. Guilty again, both cases. Death penalty, round 2.
So same outcome, even after a Supreme Court intervention and new trials.
It was. But Henry's lawyers, they weren't done. They appealed again and again, this time arguing that he was intellectually disabled. They brought up his rough childhood, the schizophrenia, even his low IQ score. Yeah. Said executing him would be cruel and unusual punishment.
Trying every legal trick in the book to save him from execution.
Yep. But in the end, none of it worked. All the appeals got denied.
A long, drawn-out legal battle really shows how complex these capital punishment cases can get.
It does. Makes you think about the role of intellectual disability in all of this and whether the punishment truly fits the crime.
So we've reached the point where all legal options are exhausted. What happens to John Ruthell Henry?
Well, in 2014, Florida Governor Rick Scott, he signs the death warrant.
That's it then. The final step must be a heavy decision for a governor to make.
No doubt about it. Signing that paper means all the legal fighting's over. The state's going to carry out the execution. It's not a decision to be taken lightly, that's for sure.
And so we come to the end of the line for John Ruthell Henry.
He was executed by lethal injection on June 18, 2014, at Florida State Prison. He refused the last meal, and in his final statement, he said he was sorry for what he did, wished he could take it back, asked for forgiveness.
A somber end to a very dark story.
It is. And while the families of his victims finally got some closure, it also brought up those big questions about the death penalty again.
Right, because it's such a divisive issue. Strong arguments on both sides.
Yeah. Some say it's a deterrent, that justice demands it. Others say it's wrong, that we shouldn't have the power to take a life no matter what.
It's a tough one to wrestle with. And this case, with all the brutality, the mental health questions, it really throws those complexities into sharp relief.
It does. Makes you think about the whole purpose of the justice system, doesn't it? Is it about revenge or rehabilitation or something else entirely?
Big questions, and ones we'll likely be debating for a long time to come. It's easy to get lost in the legal back and forth, the psychology of it all, but we can't forget about the real people at the heart of this case, the victims.
Absolutely. Patricia, Suzanne, Eugene. They deserve to be more than just names in a case file. Real people with families who love them.
Let's start with Patricia, Henry's first wife. 28 years old when he killed her. Left behind two little girls, toddlers, really, 2 and 3 years old. I can't imagine what that must have been like for them, losing their mom so young, so violently.
It's hard to even think about. The trauma, the grief, and it's not just the kids, it's the whole family, friends, everyone who knew her. It ripples outward.
Murder, it's not just a crime against one person, it affects a whole community.
It really does. And then there's Suzanne, Henry's second wife, trying to escape that abusive relationship, trying to protect herself, and Eugene, little Bucky, went to a shelter, tried to get a restraining order.
She did everything right. It's so sad that it wasn't enough.
It makes you wonder, what more could have been done? Did the system let her down?
Those are questions that stay with you. And little Eugene, only 4 years old, he never had a chance. It's hard to even process something like that. A child murdered by someone who should have been protecting him.
It really shakes you to your core. That loss of innocence and the betrayal on top of everything else. It's just awful.
It really is. Suzanne's niece, Eugene's cousin, Selena Geiger, she spoke out after Henry's execution, said it brought some peace, some closure. But is closure really possible in a case like this?
Closure's a tricky thing. Means different things to different people. Maybe it's seeing justice done. Maybe it's finding a way to live with the pain, honor the memory of those you lost.
It's not a finish line, more like a long road.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
A long road of
Yeah.
lots of twists and turns. For some, it might be about channeling that grief into something positive. Advocating for change, supporting other families who've been through similar tragedies.
Finding some meaning in all the pain. Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into John Ruthell Henry, what are some things you hope our listeners will take away from all of this?
It's a tough case, for sure. But it reminds us that even in the face of such darkness, there's still good in the world. People who fight for justice, who support each other through unimaginable loss.
Hope and resilience, even in the darkest times.
Exactly. Remember the victims. Patricia, Suzanne, Eugene. Think about the complexities of the justice system, those big questions about life and death, punishment and forgiveness.
And maybe even be inspired to make a difference in whatever way you can, whether it's speaking out against violence, supporting victims' families, or just being more aware of these issues in our world. It's been a heavy journey, but an important one. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep digging, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.